maybe before trying to understand the current situation with Michael Cohen, the president's attorney, we should understand what a fixer is. I am Damonous. Jesus is my king. You are my family.
Cops like hit and runs. They work them hard, they clear them fast. Right now there's a BCI unit pulling paint chips off a guardrail. Tomorrow they're going to be looking for the owner of a custom-painted, hand-rubbed Jaguar XJ12. The guy you hit, if you got to look at the plates, it won't even take that long. There's no play here. There's no angle, there's no champagne room. I'm not a miracle worker, I'm a janitor. The math on this is simple. The smaller the mess, the easier it is for me to clean up.
So that's a great scene from an equally fantastic drama from back in 2007 called Michael Clayton, about the title character played by George Clooney, and it's about a unique type of lawyer that most people never heard of before. As it says here in this article, he's a big law firm's fixer. There's a client involved in a hit and run. The firm sends Clayton. One of the firm's attorneys has a mental breakdown in court. The firm sends Clayton. There's a mess and the firm is involved. They send Clayton. Now, before the events of this year, when Michael Cohen, President Trump's personal fixer, came under scrutiny, and certainly the most recent of news events, before that time, if you looked up information or if you just do searches now, back in the time when the movie came out, everyone was saying, oh, law firms, they don't, fixers, that's just fiction. It's like in here, this is from the Chicago Tribune. This is an editorial column, but it's someone's asking about, hey, this happened in the Michael Clayton movie. Do big law firms have fixers on their staffs? Answer: it makes a nice movie, but I don't think there's much support for the notion of a fixer in the modern law firm world, said Thomas Morsch, a Northern University law professor and former partner of Chicago's Sidney Austin LLP. So like I said, fast forward to today, and you see all over the place, hey, Donald Trump's attorney and fixer. Will ex-Trump fixer Michael Cohen now cooperate? Attorney and fixer. Trump's fixer. So with the very recent news about Cohen pleading guilty to 8 federal counts, how did we get to that situation? And should we believe this to be the beginning of the end for Donald Trump and his presidency? You almost have to laugh sometimes because every day there's something new that the mass media comes up with and says, oh, well, this is it. Trump is done. Yet he keeps sailing through. We have to think maybe there's some godly element to this, that these are why the bullets just bounce off of President Trump. It is interesting because the other day I was doing some web searches on this to actually look at the timeline, because I've been following this case all along. And, you know, sometimes you save a website here and there, and then you forgot where you saved the link, where you read it, but you have that memory of this. But, you know, hey, Fox News kind of did it for me here and has a timeline of Michael Cohen and how he moved from being completely for Trump to kind of against him. It's definitely got some interesting flavor to the story, because in here their timeline, interestingly, starts out with something we'll talk about in a little bit, the April 9th raid of Cohen's office. But even after that, on April 11th, Cohen would rather jump out of a building than turn on Trump. Cohen is removed from being Trump's attorney. A friend of his involved with a taxi business that Cohen owned, and we'll talk a little bit more about his dealings, pleads guilty for pocketing $5 million in passenger fees that were supposed to help fund public transportation. Now, Cohen distanced himself from this person, saying they had never been partners in this business or any other. Trump remains confident in Cohen, but on June 20th, Cohen resigns from his post as the deputy finance chair of the Republican National Committee's Finance Committee. And then this in July is when things started to change a little, because then Cohen's saying, hey, my wife, my daughter, and my son have my first loyalty and always will. Next major thing is Cohen releases this tape of him and others in a room with Trump discussing, purportedly, the payments to the woman who had claimed to have had affairs with Trump. August 19th, bank fraud investigation revealed in reports. New York Times revealed that federal investigators were probing whether Cohen committed bank fraud on more than $20 million worth of loans, as well as violated campaign finance laws. And then that leads us up to the present time, August 21st, Cohen pleading guilty to 8 criminal counts and implicating Trump in saying that Trump was aware of the payments and actually directed him to make the payments. So what about this tape and the stunt from Chris Cuomo on his news show playing this tape provided by Cohen?
I need to open up a company for the transfer of all of that info regarding our friend David, so that I'm going to do that right away. I've actually come up and I've spoken to Alan Weisselberg about how to set the whole thing up with funding. Yes, and it's all the stuff, because you never know where that company, you never know what he's going to be. Correct. So I'm all over that. And I spoke to Alan about it when it comes time for the financing, which will be. Listen,
what financing?
We'll have to pay you. So no. I got no.
Hey, Don, how are you?
The interesting thing in that tape, I think, is, I'll give you the link. You can watch it more. I'm not the kind of video channel where I'm going to keep replaying the same thing, which I think is kind of annoying when people do that. But I'll let you replay that yourself. It's very interesting. The very end of that tape is clearly there's a segment cut out. There's the end of the conversation with Trump, and then the next thing is someone who came up to Michael Cohen at some later time and said, "Hey, how's it going?" Right? But so right when it's getting good, that's when the tape cuts off. Which that kind of makes you wonder, well, if this really is the smoking gun that has Trump by the balls, why would you only allow that much to be played? I think another interesting thing is that Trump is there saying, when he talks about financing, he said, whoa, what financing? So if this is really a cover-up that Trump intended to have done at that point in time in collusion with Michael Cohen, it's kind of an odd conversation for that to happen, and you wouldn't expect it to be that way. You would expect it to be more revealing about the chicanery behind it. Some of the things on that tape probably require a little bit of background. On the tape, Cohen's David appears to refer to American Media Incorporated's chairman and CEO David Pecker. AMA, the parent company of National Enquirer, agreed to pay Karen McDougal, one of the Playboy model, who claimed to have an affair with Trump, $150,000 for her story about a 2006 affair with Trump. AMI never published McDougal's story, following a tabloid practice called catch and kill. Well, this is a presumption that she had a valid story. That's what the mainstream media theory is, that she had a valid story. National Enquirer, we were friends with Trump, or David Pecker was friends with Trump, bought the story, and then just sat on it. It could just as well be that her story was total BS, and not even the National Enquirer wanted to print it. And I didn't say what the words were supposed to be in that audio. One thing I will give Chris Cuomo credit for a change is letting the tape play before saying what's in it. A lot of people are saying that Trump says, hey, pay with cash, but Rudy Giuliani, Trump's current top lawyer, is saying that it's don't pay with cash. The first time I heard it, now I had read about it first, so it's hard to say. First time I read, I thought quite distinctly I heard Trump say, don't pay with cash. But I think in either case, what you have to think about is, what is the relevance here? Trump is basically claiming that he learned of Michael Cohen's payments later on. He says, later on I knew. Later on. What he did, and they weren't taken out of the campaign finance. That's the big thing. That's a much bigger thing. Did they come out of the campaign? They didn't come out of the campaign. They came from me. The president's comments come after his former longtime personal attorney and self-described fixer entered a guilty plea with federal prosecutors on Tuesday, admitting to campaign violating campaign finance laws by arranging hush money payments to adult film star Stormy Daniels and Playboy model Karen McDougal at the direction of then-candidate Trump. But what does that really mean? Is it because it's written, that's what it is? Is that really the law, or is it an interpretation? Is it a jump that you have to get to make that conclusion? The Cohen tape is not helpful to the president, but because of the structure of campaign finance rules, it may not be conclusive. The question for legal purposes is whether Trump would have made this payment even if he had not been a candidate. Trump would argue that even if he had powerful political reasons to hide the McDougal relationship, he also had personal ones, and he could have both objectives in mind, to spare himself political as well as personal trouble. Under the rules, a dual motive is enough to muddy the legal waters. So contrary to what all the mainstream media is saying, especially Trump haters like CNN and so forth, it's not a done deal here that this is really a campaign violation, because that's the jump that the federal prosecutors are saying, is they're saying, well, payment was made during the campaign season, so it's actually like a contribution to the campaign. I think one of the ways to look at this story as well is that if Michael Cohen was Trump's fixer, and for many, many years, which is true, no one's debating that. So he traditionally did things like this, right? So he was on retainer for, and lawyers take retainers, they take money up front to do their work. So he's a fixer. He's not your normal attorney, right? He's your Michael Clayton type of attorney. He probably has a large income from this prefixed retainer. He probably has to hunt down stories like this or claims from whoever. Someone trips in a Trump hotel or whatever. He probably has to respond and clean this up quickly so it's not a big deal and just get it out. It's cheaper to get out of the way. Hence the reason for the fixer. And I really, if you doubt what I'm kind of surmising there, you really need to watch that Michael Clayton movie, because once you see that, and again, I saw this actually years ago, so even before any of this mess, I always loved the movie. But, it seems so logical that law firms would employ such people, or rich people like Donald Trump would employ such people to get essentially the riffraff out of their hair. But now back to the question, why has Michael Cohen, who stood behind Trump so long, suddenly kind of change and take a different course, flip, if you will, on the boss? Because Giuliani did also say something very, very true here. I question the strategy of doing this, of trying to make a tape say what it doesn't say, or of putting out tape in which you're kind of proud of the fact that you're a lawyer taping your client and then thinking you can cooperate with the government. To cooperate with the government, you've got to have credibility. First thing that happens is Cohen's going to be disbarred. He's a pariah to the legal profession. So I think, whether you love or hate Trump, there's a very real thing here of, would you want your lawyer taping you and then years later when you thought this was in confidence to release this to the public for his own gain? But maybe the reality is that Cohen had a lot to gain, or certainly a lot to lose. Because this story here, I'm crushing it. How Michael Cohen, touting his access to President Trump, convinced companies to pay millions. So this story, I'm not going to go through all, but it's basically saying that, he had that taxi company, he had all these other dealings, and he was actually consulting with firms, basically kind of insinuating that he has access to the president. This is all over last year, 2017. Building up this empire, if you will, based on his name and his ability to get the ear of the president. This was a guy that Robert Mueller and his team saw and everyone else who wants to take down Trump and said, this is the weak link. This guy's gotten fat in the hog, taking advantage of situations financially. We can squeeze him. And so this brings us back to that raid that we talked about earlier on April 9th. Now, here's an interesting thing, and at the time, I actually didn't piece together that these stories happened so soon to each other. If you remember, there was a fire, and this article was updated April 16th, but the fire actually occurred on April 7th on a Saturday at Trump Tower. It happened on the 50th floor, I think it was, and there was even a resident who actually had been a friend, this Brassner guy, who had been a friend of Andy Warhol and had a whole bunch of paintings and a lot of different flammable artifacts in his apartment, and that caught fire, apparently. That's the official story, and resulted in his death. So there's one death in this whole thing. But that happened on Saturday, April 7th. Now, where this fire at Trump Tower really gets interesting on April 7th, Daily Mail reported that Michael Cohen actually called a friend of his at Trump Tower and said, "You better get out." And this friend of his happened to be Dennis Shields, a banker, who is the boyfriend of Bethany Frankel. Now, Bethany Frankel, those of you who are familiar with the Real Housewives or who have been Trump fans and are familiar with her being on The Celebrity Apprentice once. Shields, who said he grew up with Cohen, said the lawyer called him personally. He said, "Are you in the building?" I said, "Yes." He said, "You better get out ASAP." That's how I knew how to get out. Otherwise, I'd still be in there. So this looked like a pretty serious fire. A 76-year-old 36th-floor resident told the New York Post she learned about the fire on a television from inside her 36th-floor apartment. "We're terrified. It was a very horrible experience, and there was no evacuation system in place. We were at a loss for what to do." Others who said they never received an announcement to leave, and that when they called the fire at the front desk, no one answered. What I'm finding odd about this story is the lack of an actual evacuation notice. There were no sprinklers, because it's an older building. There was no sprinklers on those upper floors. So someone was either very confident this fire was not going further, or maybe the fire was targeted. What's even more disturbing to me is then when I wound up researching this, I found out, Dennis Shields died recently. Today, Bethany is in mourning. On August 10th, Shields, just 51, died of an apparent prescription pill overdose in his New York City Trump Tower apartment. Bethany is absolutely devastated, says a Frankel confidant. She lost her best friend, her partner. He was her family. He was also a childhood friend of Michael Cohen's. And going back in time, back to that fire, remember, is Saturday, April 7th, when the fire broke out in Trump Tower. It was Monday, April 9th, when the FBI raided the Rockefeller Center office and Park Avenue hotel room of Michael Cohen. What am I saying here? I think it's an odd coincidence, right? That there's a fire in Trump Tower. Michael Cohen calls his longtime friend saying, "Get out of that place as soon as possible." And then 2 days later, less than 2 days later, Michael Cohen's office is raided in another building. And then fast forward to August 10th, this friend who he called because he was concerned he's in Trump Tower and he might, for whatever reason, I mean, like, if you knew there was a fire there, it's odd because this was a special call that Cohen made to Shields. I mean, if there's a fire, normally you would presume that there's an evacuation going on. Was there something more that Cohen knew that he had to call his friend and say, "Get out of there"? And then it's really bizarre to me that then in early August here, that same friend overdoses. Now, yes, you read the articles and it says he had problems, addiction problems. So it could be just crazy coincidence. But if it's not a coincidence, or if it just even looked like it's not a coincidence to Michael Cohen, maybe that was the reason he finally flipped and said, yeah, I'll plead guilty to all these charges. Because remember what Michael Cohen said on July 2nd, my wife, my daughter, and my son have my first loyalty and always will. Thanks for watching. Please like this video and subscribe to this channel. Catch me on these alternate media sources.